Welcome, everyone. Today's panel is sponsored by CALMA, the Center for Advances in Libraries, Museums, and Archives at the University of Washington High School. If you're new to CALMA, I'd invite you to check out our website to learn more and to sign up for our listserv to receive occasional updates on our programming and all of the GLAM research happening at the iSchool. And with that brief introduction, I'll hand it off to our moderator, Meena Selvakumar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to CALMA for organizing this panel, and especially Sharon Streams and Brandon Locke. And thank you all for being here for this conversation. As Brandon mentioned, I'm Meena Selvakumar. I'm an associate teaching professor at as the Master of Arts in Museology program within University of Washington's iSchool. I've also worked in several science museums around the country before I started teaching here. Brandon, could you go to the next slide, please? On September 2nd, 2018, an inferno ripped through Brazil's oldest science museum, the National Museum, claiming more than 90% of its culturally and scientifically invaluable artifacts. The fire was caused by a short circuit that ignited, but we know that the real cause was poor organizational readiness, outdated fire prevention systems, inadequate safety measures, and budget cuts. Low priorities by the organization. Next slide, Brandon. On January 7th of this year, 2025, the Palisades fire almost destroyed the Getty Villa. It destroyed a large part of the grounds and was really perilously close to destroying the villa itself, and including its invaluable collection, its own invaluable collection, as well as priceless items that it had on loan at the time. The cause for this fire is believed to be fireworks. But again, inarguably, the real cause is that allowed this kind of massive and uncontrollable spread were the drought conditions that dried out huge swaths of the larger area caused by climate change. So our conversation today will focus on what we can do now to create more sustainable and resilient libraries, archives, and museums so that we can all be better stewards of our culture. First, I assume that most of you in the audience are professionally connected with libraries, archives, and museums, which we'll shorthand, we'll just call them LAMs. But we know that these organizations touch everyone in the country to their own connections with LAMs. And even as the distinctions between the three have become increasingly blurred, as cultural heritage institutions, they all share common goals. LAMs preserve knowledge. They're repositories of historical records and artistic creations. They're invaluable primary source materials for researchers. LAMs promote learning. They're places of lifelong informal learning centers. They provide public access to information. They foster curiosity, critical thinking. LAMs foster cultural understanding. They help us remember and understand our own collective heritage. They confront us. They inspire us. They build empathy. So today, our conversation focuses on climate change, on everyone who works in these sectors, as well as the sectors and our broader public. So we're very lucky to have three experts who have been working with LAMs in their environmental sustainability initiatives, and they've been helping them think of it in many of the following ways: in mitigation, right, reducing their own carbon footprint, for example, or in adaptation, using new and different strategy to protect their resources, in catalyzing organizational change. In engaging and educating their own communities and public audiences, in activating policy decisions, and in contributing to research and practice in all of the above for the sector. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Rebecca Smith-Aldrich of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative at the Mid-Hudson Library System, Era Tanzi of Memory Rising, and Stephanie Shapiro of Environment and Cultural Partners. So our agenda is going to look like this. Each of our wonderful panelists is going to share for about 10 to 12 minutes a little bit about themselves, how they got into their sustainability work, and how they are working with libraries or archives or museums. Then we will come together for a discussion that I'll moderate. I'll begin with a few questions to explore intersections between within their work and challenges and opportunities. And after that, uh, we'll open it up to questions from the audience, sorry. With that, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Smith-Aldrich to share a little bit about her and her work.
Oh, thank you, Mina, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. This is nice to be on the platform with Era, who I admire so much, but I'll do what you asked me to do. So I have a day job for the past 25 years of helping a consortia of public libraries really survive and thrive in the face of everything that's going on in the world today. So my job for a very long time has been to make sure they're relevant and responsive so that our public will vote yes when we ask them for more money, and that people will come still volunteer to be on the governance board. So that's where I started from in my career. And I have a personal passion on the topic of climate change, climate action. And these two things really dovetail together because we really can't be relevant and responsive unless we acknowledge the context within which we are offering our services, which is the reality of the world here today. So I would say about 12 years ago, we started the work here in New York. I found a lot of like-minded people who was thinking like I did, that I just didn't see enough effort in our profession on the topic of climate action, and really felt that libraries should be leaders on this topic, given the promulgation of libraries across the country, how trusted we are across the country, and really leveraging not only our position in our communities to do good on behalf of our communities when it comes to climate action, but also to protect our assets in the face of the predicted climate hazards for the various regions across the country. So this is obviously an enormous topic, and people feel overwhelmed and sometimes paralyzed by it. And so this little group of us in New York started thinking, what do library stakeholders need to be successful on this topic? So, Brent, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I'll just share this topic, as I know many of you feel also, is just so enormous. It's such a massive challenge, and making progress on it in the face of the political climate we find ourselves in and have found ourselves in for multiple decades has just felt like such an uphill battle. So acknowledging the fact that it is a grand challenge, and inserting more urgency into this work to get more attention to it in our profession is something we've been working on for over 12 years, and really saw the American Library Association join us in bigger and bigger ways across the past decade as we were growing a mass of people who thought like we did. So what you're looking at, and when you have the slide, you can just click on this and go and read this. This is a call to action for the profession to take this more seriously, start thinking about their work in new ways, and really start moving in a better direction with more intensity and intention on this topic. Brandon, next slide, please. So at what we call the SLI, the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, there's a group of volunteers who got together. We've now been together officially for 10 years, working to develop resources and community for public libraries, academic libraries, and school librarians on this very topic, and really making sure our libraries are contributing to healthy and resilient communities in the future that are not just worried about dystopia, but are really thriving in the face of what is happening and what will come. So next slide, please. We've had great success in turning the page on this conversation early in our existence by defining what we meant when we were talking about sustainability. So you might be familiar with the triple bottom line definition, which we borrowed from an economist, John Elkington, who wrote a book called Cannibals with Forks. And we translated it for the library community to help us get beyond thinking that we're just going green when we talk about sustainability, and really address the systemic nature picture of what's going on when we think about what's happening with climate change and the severe weather that we're now confronting. And so asking folks to find balance amongst these three things, not just making better choices for the environment, but recognizing the economic costs both to our institutions and society for some of the choices that we're making, as well as making choices that are more socially equitable for those that are impacted by the choices that we make all along the supply chain of things that we need to do our work. This has resulted in libraries that are making better decisions tomorrow than they did yesterday. So we created a host of resources, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to help libraries make better decisions using this lens moving forward to create an easier entry point to this massive topic, which is climate change. Next slide, please. This is just a quick shot of a bunch of groups that have been working with us recently, partnering with us, working as well to accelerate the work that's going on this topic. And it's just about every week we've got someone knocking on our door saying, how can we help? What can we do together? Which has been fantastic and wonderful, and I think has really changed the conversation across the profession in a big way. Next slide, please. Because we do need to act in a collective way. We can't just all be in our own little isolated corners thinking we know what to do and thinking our organization is going to be the one that turns the tide. We need everyone pulling in the same direction on the stuff that matters the most, because what we do is very important and needs to be protected. And so as Mina was describing these horrific events that are really threatening very unique collections that cannot be replaced, that is one aspect of what we're concerned about, as is human health and wellness and the economic ability for us all to continue on as the climate change issues rock the economy as well. So pulling in the same direction on the things that matter the most with urgency is where we are very much focused in this work right now. And moving forward, if you don't mind advancing the slide there again, Brandon, we have learned over time that urgency drives change. So changing people's behavior, waking them up to what's going on, where to put their energy and time is pretty important. And we have to do that without freaking people out so much they're curled up in a ball in the corner, right? So we want to use facts and data and show what has worked in other places. So Brandon, go to the next slide, please. We totally subscribe to Project Drawdown's idea that every job is a climate job, and really integrating this into every facet of library work is what we've been working on for a decade, from operations to policy writing to how we treat our library workers, how we operate our buildings, how we prepare for disasters, how we help our communities prepare and recover from disasters. It's everything. And so that's a big, big job. Next slide, please. So our next evolution in thought, beyond just being sustainable and making better choices, is injecting that urgency on the topic of climate action, which for many years was politically not okay to talk about openly. But boy, are we going for it now. So when we say climate action, this is what we're talking about. And Mina already gave you two of the three components of this, which is very traditional reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to slow down climate change for future generations, but preparing and adjusting in the face of what is already happening and what's about to happen for the next few decades, because we did not get ahead of climate change the way climate scientists asked us to. And then really throughout everything we're doing, and honestly, I do think might be the secret ingredient to actually solving this whole damn thing, is really the justice angle of it, which is to increase empathy, respect, and understanding for each other so we can make better decisions that are better for everyone in our communities and really understand the lived experiences of everyone who are dealing with this issue and how we support that work. And the combination of these three things is where we center the idea of climate action. So going to the next slide, please, Brandon. You'll see this reflected in the National Climate Action Strategy, which Era and I worked on in 2023, 2024, and was released by ALA and the Sustainable Libraries Initiative in June of 2024. And this strategy is organized around those three concepts that I just spelled out for you. And then the implementation guide is about 19 more pages of bringing it to life and helping people see how to work on it and giving people examples of what this looks like and really making it as doable as possible for folks. We surveyed about 1,000 folks across the profession in preparation for writing this report and learned that one of the greatest barriers is how to talk about this. So you'll also find resources in there that help maybe depoliticize some of the talking points and help you do the work regardless of what it's called, basically. But Brent, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the strategy is legit, one page long. That was the goal of the working group that worked on this. to make it as simple as possible, to give people some benchmarking ideas. But we also wanted to be aggressive in some of the language around this because it's such a big ask that's necessary. So you'll see we adopted the Paris climate goal of a 43% reduction from 2015 levels by 2050 for climate change mitigation. We want libraries on the front lines of helping with adaptation and community resilience work, which is a lot of what I think we're going to talk about here today, and climate justice work and using the transformative power of education to help everyone come along with this work and join in because it will take all of us. Next slide, please. The other things you'll find in there are tips for talking about climate smart libraries, making sure you're really clear that this is not all new stuff. You're doing a lot of things that are already, going in the right direction on this topic. You're not starting from zero. And then finding the partners that are going to help you accelerate the work and be a good partner in your community on it. And really calling on the library profession to do all of this work with more intentionality, that it can't just be one champion like us here on this call. We need everyone in the organization agreeing this is where we should be going and how we're going to do that work. Next slide, please. So just a few tools I thought I would share with you real quick. We worked with Web Junction, which is overseen by OCLC, which has been a great partner to us, and did a series of five events that are freely available on the Web Junction site that go deeper on each of those three topics, talk about partnerships and climate justice work. And we created this little simple Word document to get people started in climate action planning to evaluate where you are, where you need to go. Next slide, please. And then from the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, we have the Roadmap to Sustainability, which is an app OCLC helped us build. You can download that right there through that QR code to help you as an individual gather your thinking on a lot of these topics you're going to be hearing about today and come up with your own action plan to find other like-minded folks, as well as our Sustainable Library Certification Program, which is a much bigger investment. It's when our organizations in library land for public libraries, academic, and school libraries need a methodology to figure out how to become more sustainable. We've built these programs to create a path forward for folks to think through how to use the triple bottom line to make better decisions and be more prepared for what's coming in the future. So we have about 270 libraries currently enrolled in this. About 50 have been certified. I just actually came from the presentation by the San Diego State University Library System, who just finished the certification program. And it's amazing what these libraries are pulling off and modeling for folks across the field. So if you go to the next slide, Brandon, you'll see another QR code where you can check out those that are already certified, what they've been doing for just real life examples. These are folks just like you and I who live in the real world and have to work with others and make good decisions to advance these topics. So now we have a growing body of examples to point to in this area. If you'd like to go to the last slide I have there, Brandon, I'll just share my contact info and just say that I don't know if you can tell, but I am really into this topic. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I certainly have a day job here, but I devote a lot of my volunteer time to Sustainable Libraries Initiative and the American Library Association, as well as writing for Library Journal to try to catalyze more and more people getting on the same road with us to work on this with more urgency, because there will be more fires, there will be more flooding, and we need to prepare for that. So, I hope I used our time wisely here, and I look forward to hearing to the other speakers and our questions and answers here in the other parts of the program. But again, thank you for the chance to chat with people, and please snap a pic of this. I love talking to people about this stuff.
Oh, thank you so much. I love your enthusiasm. I really appreciated how simple that plan was for organizations to just jump in, like truly lowering the barrier and then allowing them to customize it for what feels relevant to them. And I was looking through your site a few days ago, and those presentations are fantastic. So all these examples to inspire organizations. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next is Era Tenzi.
Great, thank you. It is a real pleasure to be on this call with Rebecca and Stephanie. I have so much respect for the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and Environment and Culture Partners. So this does feel like, being part of the dream team today. So thanks so much for having me. If I could have the next slide, please. So my primary professional identity is as an archivist, and several years ago, I started looking at the literature and I was trying to figure out why in a profession that preserves so much of our past for the future, we were not talking about one of the biggest issues facing not just the future, but also the current day, which is climate change. And I was finding that there really was not that much at the time written in the archival literature around climate change. So I wrote an article about a decade ago in a sustainability journal about adapting archival practice for climate change. And then I just couldn't stop working on it. So for those of you who are not archivists, because I think compared to libraries and museums, we are the smaller of the profession, archives are institutions that care for archival materials. So these are records of ongoing historical
Whoa.
importance.
Wait, can I take a
We
picture of that?
think we have someone who needs to mute themselves. Okay, thanks. um, so archives are found in all sorts of institutions, whether we're talking about large universities, local state governments, and even many corporations have their own archives. And archives face short-term and long-term risks related to climate change. In the short term, we have disasters like fires, hurricanes, and floods. And in the long term, we have issues such as sea level rise and climate related migration. Next slide, please. So a few years after I wrote that article in 2015, my collaborator Ben Goldman and I worked with some of his colleagues from Penn State University, and we had a data set from OCLC's archive grid that was around 1,232 archives, and we basically took that data set and tried to assess where the geographic climate-related risks were with that data set. And unsurprisingly, like 98% of archives would be affected by at least one climate risk factor. The reason I say this is unsurprising is that there is literally nowhere on Earth that is not going to be impacted by climate change in some way, shape, or form. But one of the issues we noticed with that data set was that at the many years ago, at the beginning of my career, I had worked in New Orleans for several years. And New Orleans is a place where there are lots of small kind of archives and funky little cultural heritage organizations. And when I looked at that data set that we got from Archive Grid, I noticed that there were a lot of really small archives missing from that data set. So if you could go to the next slide. So this was sort of when we did the original research, this is the amount of data we had. So next slide, please. Then Ben and I applied for a grant from the Society of American Archivists Foundation for a project called Repo Data. And this was a grant-funded effort to go gather the largest geospatial data set we could create on archives so that we would have a more accurate data set of archives in the United States. Because believe it or not, there was not a beyond the OCLC archive grid data set, there was not a comprehensive data set of archives across the United States. So with this project, we contacted over 150 archival organizations. So in the archives field, we have lots of local, state, and regional archival associations. So for example, I belong to the Cincinnati Area Archivist Round Table. I also belong to the Society of Ohio Archivists. I also belong to the Midwest Archives Conference, and I also belong to the Society of American Archivists. So there are lots of organizations out there like that. We contacted as many as we could to get their membership directories and then use that data to form the repo data set, which is publicly available online. You can get to it through a GitHub repository. Next slide, please. So if you think about the earlier slide I had, which was before repo data, that was like, some green dots. And then after we did the data set, after we gathered all that data, you can see how much more there is. Next slide. And just to bring this, zooming in on my home state of Ohio, you can really see the difference that that kind of data gathering makes, where it really begins to surface smaller and also more rural archives that were left out of the original data set. Next slide, please. So what do we know about American archives? Well, the vast majority of them are small little historical societies, or they're based in museums. So a lot of museums will have archival records from the community. There will be lots of small historical societies run by volunteers. And this is important to understand because these are often the places that are more vulnerable to climate change than other larger and more well-resourced archives. Next slide. So there are a lot of short-term and long-term challenges to archives. I will just tap on a couple of these. So archival records have to generally be kept in steady environmental conditions. Otherwise, we run the risk of things like mold outbreaks. So the more that we are having weird weather, if you will, so like weather where there's rapidly fluctuating changes in temperature and humidity that can introduce a lot of dangers and risks to the storage of archival records. When there are major disasters, records that are held, especially in local and state government archives, often have vital records. Those might be birth certificates, death certificates, property records, marriage records. Those are the types of records where after a disaster, people often lose them and then they need to go get those records. So we have to make sure those institutions in particular are adapting for climate change, because they will also often be called upon after a disaster to provide vital records. Let's go on to the next slide in the interest of time. So these challenges kind of that myself and my co-panelists have been talking about are so immense that you will probably notice an underlying theme from Rebecca's talk, my talk, and Stephanie's talk, that these challenges we face cannot be solved by librarians, archivists, museum people on our own. We really also need some major public policy happening at all levels of government, but particularly the federal level as well. And unfortunately, that is where there's a huge vacuum of leadership right now. But even with that, I am a big public policy nerd. I used to be on the Society of American Archivists Committee on Public Policy. And so a couple years ago, I started talking about, what if we had a Green New Deal for archives? This is very much informed by my interest in the original 1930s New Deal, which is the set of programs that the federal government put together to lift the country out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. One of the things that is interesting about the original New Deal is it employed tons of archivists to preserve local and state government records. And in fact, the original New Deal hired more archivists in the 1930s during the Depression than we have working in archives today, which is a mind-blowing fact, but it is true. So I had to triple check that several times. I guess that's more than triple checking it, quadruple checking it, because I almost couldn't believe it when I found that. So if you go to the next slide, I'll go through my 3-point plan for a Green New Deal for archives. The first is that, again, this is sort of a speculative public policy, but I do believe that if we keep at this long enough, the political tides could change. So this is what I would prioritize first with such a public policy program. The first was that we would create staffing, real meaningful staffing levels for those archives with vital records that people need in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. So that's recommendation 1. If we go to the next slide to recommendation 2, we would have a nationwide plan for preserving and developing emergency responses for collections across the country. And then finally, next slide, recommendation 3, this is the one that gets real funky and out there, but I think is really fun to think about. If we know that there are a lot of changes happening in our local environments that are not always getting recorded and preserved in our archives. So we could talk about developing documentation strategies based on watersheds to preserve and document the kind of climatic changes that are happening in bioregional or watershed-based areas. So final slide here. So one of the things that has been probably one of the highlights of my career is that I started out writing this Green New Deal for archives thinking this is just some like funky public policy thing. And who knows if it could ever get legs behind it. The Society of American Archivists, of which I am a council member, every few years when we meet in Washington, D.C., we have something called Archives on the Hill, which is when we do advocacy visits with members of Congress. We did it a couple years ago, and through my friend Jess Farrell, we made some connections with Senator Ed Markey. Senator Ed Markey is one of the co-sponsors, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on some of the resolutions supporting a Green New Deal. Well, it turns out some of his staff members are very interested in archives. One of his staff members' mother is an archivist. And so we started having lots of calls with Senator Ed Markey's office, and Senator Markey, along with, you can see a couple other names here, last year introduced a bill into Congress called the Public Archives Resiliency Act. And much of this is based on some of the work and suggestions originally pulled together in a Green New Deal for archives. So that's the good news. The bad news is that a lot of this depends on a functional IMLS and a archivist of the United States who is committed to working on climate change issues. Obviously, things have changed quite a bit in the last since December 2024. So while this bill is maybe not advancing the way that I think we would have hoped when it was being written, the reality is that there is an actual bill addressing some of these climate change and resilience acts, or needs rather, in legislation. So that is, I think, a great example of how we should always not be afraid to push for what we think is worth achieving, because you just don't know where things will land. And I don't think that the relevance of this will go away at any point. So hopefully our political tides will change and we can accelerate movement on this in the future. So I think I'll go ahead and stop here and turn the mic back over to Mina. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Era. That was actually really inspiring to hear how you are making so much progress at the policy level, which is not something we hear often in our field. And so, yes, here's to hoping that tides will change and this will continue. Thank you so much. And next we have Stephanie Shapiro.
Great. Thank you so much. My name's Stephanie Shapiro. I'm also really excited to be here with Era, Rebecca, Mina. Really appreciate the invitation to present. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Environment and Culture Partners. My background is in art history, museums, leadership, and climate. And I'll talk a little bit about ECP. Next slide, please. So we're a national nonprofit that strengthens environmental leadership in the cultural sector by providing a clarity of work and connection of resources to deliver impact at scale. So we know that the global cultural sector, which when I say cultural sector, I'm really including those libraries, archives, really everything that's related to people and identity, that we has a significant role to play in the, in the climate crisis. And we found that people are often feeling overwhelmed with information, ambiguity, etc. And so we started to come together to provide that path forward and co-founded ECP in 2021. Our other co-founder is Sarah Sutton. She's the author of The Green Museum and one of the individuals who really began the movement of work at that nexus of climate and culture. So next slide, please. And actually, next slide, please. Great. So museums of all types, we just heard about archives, libraries, are all intertwined with tangible and intangible cultural heritage, which are being threatened by the impacts of climate change. And this is so jarring because for many reasons, but I think one main piece is that cultural heritage defines socio-ecological relationships of identity. And these offer insights and alternative ways of understanding and thinking. Next slide. And these organizations, which we've all been talking about, and museums, support our community and our cultural heritage. And this is where climate action can and already is occurring. And so this mission-driven work has a role in cultural organizations, no matter your job or your department title. We believe that every job is a climate job. Next slide. And according to the 2022 the American Alliance of Museums, their 2022 annual survey of museum goers, 92% of the surveyed US adults believe that museums should be doing climate work. So they should be decreasing their own carbon footprint, and they should be educating the public about climate change. So we're really seeing this shift even beyond that the public is expecting organizations like ours to be doing this climate work. Next slide. And I want to add on the library's slide that was very similar to this, but these are just some of the organizations, engaging in this work because we can't do this work alone. And Partners is in ECP's name for a reason. We do all of our work in partnership with other entities, organizations to do this work together. Next slide. So for some of our work, we focus on the built environment. So this is a research project that started as an IMLS grant in 2021, where we partnered with New Buildings Institute and the New England Museum Association to create the cultural sector's first in-depth energy use analysis and first estimate of the cultural sector's energy impacts on climate. So this chart shows our findings of site energy use intensity by cultural institution type. You can see at the top, art museums really topped out our usage, even above those with living collections, our zoos and aquariums. And the full report and findings can be found on our website. But this work informed our next research project, next slide please, called MinMax. And so this is an active, I say active in quotes, like we was terminated, it's back, who knows what's happening, IMLS grant right now, where we're really looking to identify the appropriate environmental conditions for collections under which changes to practice could save money, energy, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions while maintaining standards of care for art and material culture. So we've engaged with 8 art museums across the US, all in different geographical regions. Era, love the bioregion idea for maps, so want to move into that. But we're excited this project will hopefully result in creating decision-making tools for professionals and organizations. So based on data modeled on actual experience and conditions. So we're building the energy models and an energy dashboard that'll be free for the public to use, and case studies to see how organizations are widening their environmental control parameters and if there's energy savings, and all without, that would go against the integrity of the materials of the collection. Next slide. And this further made us also realize that we need to have a benchmark for the sector. And so Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which we know right now is in the news on potentially being completely removed. This is a free tool provided by the EPA you can do this for house, states and cities, and lots of buildings are benchmarking their energy use using this system. And museums are able to type in their information and kind of track their own usage. But what does not exist is a benchmark for museums specifically. So we've partnered with New Buildings Institute and EPA to try to create this museum category, because right now museums are just being, you can just benchmark against, I think, like public gathering areas. So like you're being compared to like an arena, which doesn't help anyone understand, where the sector is and where we could be going. So we're working on this and trying to fund this right now. Next slide. So in addition to the built environment, we're working on collaborative projects. So this is one that I'm really excited about. This just was released last week. Caretakers of Wonder provides a new climate action playbook for museums to use to educate children 0 to 8 on climate change issues, impacts, and adaptations. And we did this in partnership with the Madison Children's Museum, Association of Children's Museums, and Verdis Group, a whole cohort of children's museums across the US as well. And so this, similar to our other work, was identifying a gap in resources and research in the field and trying to fill it. Next slide. So this is another set of resources. This is the Climate Resilience Resources for Cultural Heritage, which Era was on our advisory group for. So this was done in partnership with the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation and Harvard University Center for Geographic Analysis. And this is just free, all free resources, many of them translated into Spanish, to develop a resilience plan. So we have an interactive map where you're able to, find your baseline climate projections for your site. We have learning modules that'll take you step by step, through to complete, basically a template for a climate plan for the aspects that are relevant for your site. And then there's tools for doing this together with other organizations. So we had organizations from Puerto Rico and New Mexico all working together to develop their own resilience plans, and being able to work together to provide that validation, to complain, also to find shared resources, is really the way that we're, trying to have organizations think about climate work. A concept that we often talk about is friends from before. So make your friends, talk to the folks next to you. Doesn't matter if they're a business, individual, what it might be. But they're the folks that you're going to be working with to prepare for and get through disasters. And you need to leverage those folks for, at a high level, and then practically when there's actually a situation to be reacting to. Next slide. And then we also are always looking for funding to distribute to the field to do this work. It's very underfunded and under-resourced. And so we've been working with the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation and Rocky Mountain Institute for the last 5 years to distribute now right over $14 million dollars to visual arts organizations to do energy efficiency work. These are, everything from replacing windows to, sealing your building envelope, etc. And we're actively talking to other funders in hopes of, continuing to do similar work, but also expanding the types of organizations that would be receiving this support. Next slide. And I just wanted to comment like a little bit before I close, just on kind of how we're meeting the moment right now. And regardless of the federal government's stance on equity and climate action, I think we at ECP are going to continue to do this work, as are, it sounds like, everyone on this call, which is really gratifying to hear. We're not compromising our values, and we're encouraging civil society organizations to pursue what fulfills your mission in the best way possible. And for most people, in the highest purpose, with a view for the very best long term, your long game. What does that timeline look like? And the actions people take often depend on their feelings or perceptions of agency, which come from observing, doing, and learning rather from innate courage. And when values and situations are misaligned, the desire to change can drive action, even amid the uncertainty. And so, as part of civil society, we believe we have a responsibility to address climate change by using our platforms to promote climate smart practices and educate, inspire, and empower others. And amid all of this chaos, I am still hopeful, because even despite the overwhelming crisis, I see so many good, talented people, everyone on this call, doing such good work. And there's such a greater capacity for agency among many more people and organizations. And there's so many great tools and research out there. And so I think being able to continue to do this work together is what makes me more hopeful. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. That was beautiful and inspiring. And yes, I mean, I think the work that you do will continue regardless, but also I think even if it is stalled a little bit right now over here, other things that we do, clearly the work continues in other countries, right? So all these plans and guides that you create support the work elsewhere, which again is going to have a positive impact on all of us. So thank you again to our three panelists for describing just a part of your work, because I know all of you do so much more. And so for you to be able to summarize just a small part, we're very grateful. So I had a few questions for the panelists, and then I'll stop and then give audience some time for your own questions. I wanted to start with the three of you have now heard from each other, and obviously the work that you do has some overlap. But I was wondering if you could each speak to what you saw as a convergence amongst your work with the other panelists um, as applied in their sectors. And it could be just one thing. It doesn't have to be the most important thing. Just something that you were inspired by in this conversation. And
I can jump in. I feel like just that everyone is doing what they're able to do and then trying to inspire others to do that work. That collaborative partnership, collaborative effort, I know rings true through all of our work and is the only way that we'll really be able to, make an impact.
The first thing that came to my mind was modeling. Like we're all trying to do the good work and get the data we need to make good decisions, but we also own the fact we're modeling behavior for those that rely on us, and respect the fact that we are essential, we are really valuable, and people are paying attention to what we do because we're smart folks. So the idea that we can also be leading the way on this topic by using our smarts and leveraging the information that we understand here to do things that I think maybe you can't see comprehensively in other industries or government agencies is something to be really proud of.
yeah.
I'll build on something that Rebecca said that I I really feel in my bones, which is that like it can't just be like the people on this call doing this work. And I think that I will say as like I am so grateful to know Stephanie and Rebecca because sometimes I feel a little bit lonely doing this work and I think it's also abundantly clear from all of our presentations that the most important work that we're all doing is not it is always done in some degree of partnership, right? Maybe sometimes it's only just a co-author. I don't want to say just a co-author. Maybe sometimes it is at the level of a single other co-author, or it might be a massive partnership, but this work like cannot be done like just by a handful of people. It has to be taken up by more people. And I think doing that work in concert with others also kind of inoculates you against feeling like you're just like screaming into the void sometimes. So it is both more effective in the long run to do this work collectively, and also it is sort of a self-protective measure for your own mental health to do this work with others.
Yeah, I totally hear that. It helps you sustain your work, right? By having others alongside you. So I was wondering if you could all talk about divergences in this case now. If we could separate these into archives, libraries, and museums as three different pieces, uh, what do you think as differences within the sectors as applied to what you're doing that makes it unique within that sector? Or are there challenges that you see in one sector that are more specific uh, to that type of organization?
I'm going to jump in here first because it was really stark to me as I saw the other two presentations, which were so impressive. How methodical and data driven what I saw from Era and Stephanie were in the public library, particularly the public sector work we do in libraries. It's more about the emotion that we are using to drive the work. Like, of 15 years now of me trying to get people's attention in my profession to do something, it was never the data that got them as much. And I've thrown a lot of data at them, but it was the emotional response after Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Irene, the fires in the West, that's when I got people's attention. And it was interesting to me how much time I actually feel like I wasted trying to like make the case when really I just had to connect with the values to motivate them, which is honestly what I've always taught my libraries about winning our votes, but to tap into people's values. That the emotional driver was what actually ended up getting us over the finish line to make sustainability a core value, to get ALA to do the call to action. When I finally convinced the executive board of ALA to do the climate action strategy. And so I think I feel like sometimes people accuse us of doing stuff by the seat of our pants, but I think that the volume and breadth of work that, particularly in public libraries, that we're confronted with to get their attention on this stuff is really, really difficult. And so I'm thrilled to be here to hear from Stephanie and Era of what they see that's different about their work compared to ours.
That was great. Thank you.
Well, one thing that I'll just sort of speak to is that I think when our work brings us into contact with the general public, the I would say like most of the general public has some sense of what a library is or some sense of what a museum is. But it is kind of like independent of the climate change question. It is always an uphill battle to educate people what archives are and what archivists do. And that also is sort of reflective now, sort of, we're going to set aside what has happened in the last 100 days with the current administration in Washington, D.C. Okay. But even so, before that, there are very different funding models for libraries and museums versus archives. And so there is like block grant funding from IMLS for state libraries that then goes to, down to public libraries. There are certain streams of museum funding that go to museums. Now, again, those are all sort of like the table's been flipped on a lot of those right now. So things are changing fast. But there are very few funding streams that are explicitly earmarked just for archives. And so that also kind of leads to some sort of like, us kind of not always having some of the resources to do some of the vital work we need to do in terms of preserving like these important cultural records that if we don't have archivists doing this work, they're going to be damaged and lost.
That's great insight, Era. I often think of the impact of the funding models on the different types of organizations. And I know museums themselves have had so many challenges over the years as their funding models have changed from largely contributed revenue to slowly integrating more and more and more earned revenue streams as government funding has declined. Stephanie, would you like to share?
Sure, I was going to definitely talk about the funding models too, but I think the thing that I find so different too is more just like the public, like how often like the public is coming in, what they see as your organization is not climate, usually for museums, and not community, usually for museums, and versus libraries, where I feel like to me that it like that's I love our library. Like that is a community center, and I think museums have a role to be a community center in a lot of places and definitely are. But I also think archives are sometimes lumped into museums or together, which is good and bad, right? But it's like trying to say like you have the issue era of like defining like yourself, in this sector, but then it's like, well, why climate? And it's hard to just the values and the data do go together. And so I mean, this is kind of just more responding to both of your pieces where it's like there's so many people for museums where we just went the values route and they're like, great, I mean, fine, but climate still doesn't have a role here. The minute we were like, well, you could save money and you could do this, they were like, show me the data, right? And then it's like funders were saying, oh, well, that would be great, show us the data. So it's this, I feel like we're in this kind of data pushing area because that's what we've heard is needed to change that narrative and the funding field of like what is needed and just trying to educate the public too, like there is a 40-year-old boiler here. Like this, like you would not want that in your house, most likely. And it is, making this entire building go and just explaining like what it takes. The back of house museum world is not really known a lot of time. I would say that probably for archives and museums and so, or libraries. And so there's kind of just like all this other work that needs to be done. And it's all, the behavior changing, the values shifting, et cetera, is all definitely meshed together somewhere. So I feel like we all do have unique areas, but I guess I see just more convergences and working together than like them being so different.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I think I heard in your presentations is, in the work that you've been doing with your toolkits, for example, and your guides that you created for organizations, is how do you bridge these two pieces where, because climate change is contextualized to the impact that it has on a very specific geographical location and the type of organization that within, how do you bridge these universal recommendations or guides for these organizations with that local context? Uh, how much granularity do organizations want, when they are trying to create something that does feel customized to their own needs?
I can say for our resources, we tailor them to basically anyone who cares about some sort of cultural heritage, mainly built environment. And there's enough resources in there, to help you get started and have you think. It's like questions about making you think about the context of your organization, no matter what it is. Because at the end of the day, we can't tailor everything so perfectly because you know your organization best. And like I know the resources, we looked at the one on the libraries team is, that you've created, and same thing, like here's a place to start. That's mainly what folks are looking for. They know the context, they just don't know what questions need to be asked and like maybe what order it needs to be put in. So I feel like we've tried to give them through the climate resilience resources data, but you don't even have to have the data to start thinking about where you want to move in the future, right? So it's like pick your own journey, but you know your organization best.
I've couched it in terms of why don't you save yourself some time and find out what your climate hazards are in your corner of the world? Because, in public libraries in particular, we like to borrow policies and plans from other places so we don't have to start from scratch. But you still have to do your own homework as to what's actually going to threaten your building, your collection. So we give them tools like the Climate Explorer and the Climate Mapping for Resilience and Adaptation portal from the Federal Climate Toolkit, which I'll put in the chat for you, which is still there. And the changes on that website have been interesting in the past 100+ days, but the data is still there. Although there's a lot of data rescue groups now pulling that data, so we have it in case it disappears. But I think it motivates folks to make sure they're prioritizing what's actually predicted to happen here and how can I learn from other places that are dealing with the same kinds of things, which saves them a lot of time where they're not preparing for a list of 15 things, they're preparing a list of 3 things.
Right. So it sounds like between, really giving them sort of a list of questions, prompts, resources for them to really like dive into something that makes it contextualized for their situation. And then they can dip back into those kinds of resources that you have to really then flesh out their plan. I wanted, given that I think we've talked a little bit or brought up the recent executive orders and the political situation and how that has either pushed us back or paralyzed many of our efforts. And we're all cognizant of that. But I was wondering if any of you have, given these circumstances, stories of optimism that you can share of what organizations have still done, grassroots efforts, collaborations, funders who've stepped in, to take out some of the burden.
I found it's almost been the silver lining, because I'm certainly hunting for those these days, is we have this phenomenal program in New York here where I'm sitting today, called the Climate Smart Communities program that the state has funded. And so watching our state's devotion to doing the work and continuing with it has been inspiring, and seeing, that your mileage may vary from state to state on that and what that looks like. But for me locally here in my own organization, what I've seen, it's almost galvanized people to be like, well, I don't want to use foul language, but like, screw them. Like, we're still going to do this work at the local level. And so that's, I think, another reason why libraries, particularly public libraries, are so critical, to be the catalyst and convener for folks who want to do good work together to keep going. We actually have a funder that called me and said, would you like some money to, help libraries contribute to community resilience? And I was like, hell yeah. That's where our Library of Local program came from. That's overlaid with those climate smart communities throughout my region that I serve here at Mid-Hudson. So I do think there's more grassroots galvanization and anger that's fueling work to push it through and get it done. But it's certainly an uphill battle.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think we're seeing kind of both. I mean, some organizations, right, are right now have been fully dependent on federal funds, right? And they are in a very different spot where there is really no other grassroots, like there's nowhere really to reach, for additional support. But then we're just seeing, which is kind of great, like organizations are just continuing to do their work. And even though we've seen some organizations maybe shifting how they're talking about it, they're still doing it. It's not greenwashing. If they don't want to threaten their federal grants, and they're not going to use the word climate, but they're going to use the word sustainability. I mean, do that. And it's just compared to the first Trump administration, to be very frank, like we were in a very different spot. Like the first administration, we joined and created the cultural sector as part of We Are Still In, which was kind of all these grassroots, over 100,000 organizations, healthcare, faith organizations, higher ed, et cetera, joined together and said, we're still in the Paris Agreement. Basically, that was in response to coming out. And it was all about mobilization and connecting and who's doing what. But here we are now, 2025, and like we already have the connections, we already have the networks. We're not convincing so many people anymore about doing this work. It's like, how do you do more? Where can we work with the community? It used to be a new idea that museums were going to install solar and energy backup that would support their community. We're seeing that just de rigueur now, right? Like, why would you not do that, or sell back the excess at a discount to nonprofits? So it's just been a big shift, and it has been. We're not where we were starting, and we don't have to build that foundation again. And so we are just seeing that shift. And like then, just as a good silver lining story, the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation and Andy Warhol Foundation announced a joint commitment of $800,000 to fund an NE8 grant that had been terminated. So that funding has gone out to those organizations as part of, I think, the Challenge America grant. So funders are looking for sure and trying to fill in that gap too.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I said thank you, Stephanie, and I wanted to know, Erin, did you have any stories of optimism you wanted to share with us? I know it's.
I I wish I had more, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really incumbent, I don't think we have any funders who are currently viewing this, but you know, NEH really had started putting together some incredibly groundbreaking climate change and cultural heritage and humanities grants. And I don't know at I don't know right now who's going to step in to fill that void. And I always retain a huge concern for smaller archives, smaller museums, because to be honest with you, I'm not worried about the big ones. You know, the big ones have development officers who will, you know, find ways to keep some of this work going. But I think we are, yeah, I think there's a vacuum right now, and I wish I had a good, better answer to your question, Mina.
It's fine. You know what? We can share this recording with funders and tell them that we need you to step in. But I'm going to pause now because I see that the time is 2:06 and open it up. I have other questions, but I wanted to make sure that we have enough time for questions from the audience. What I'd like audience members to do is if you have a question, use the raise hand icon that's on the screen, and then I will call on you in order that you raised your hand. So while you are thinking about your questions, I have another couple of questions. So I was curious if you could talk about research areas that, you know, we have a lot of researchers on this call being hosted by CALMA. And are there research questions that you think would be of immense value to your work right now, or relevant to your work right now?
I can jump in on this, because if anyone does have a secret source of funding and wants to talk with me about this, I'll tell you about. I just submitted actually a proposal to a funder that does make awards to individuals, because this is the project I want to have funded. And if it doesn't come through, I'd love to find a partner. So my research project that I would really like to see, and it's something that I kind of did a little test pilot of after the wildfires in Southern California this year, is to start kind of an annual census of the cultural heritage damages that are accumulating because of climate change, because we do not have kind of like a registry or an inventory of what we are currently losing. I think all of us on this call kind of, you know, I mean, Mina, you yourself kind of had the slides about Brazil and the Getty Villa, but we do not have kind of you know, this year in what we lost or what we almost lost. And hurricane season is starting in a few days, right? And so this is something that we have a lot of good tools out there that are showing the risks to libraries, archives, and museums. And I should have noted that my repo data set is now being incorporated by Ed Benoit, who's a professor at Louisiana State University, in a project called Protect GLAM. And they are pulling in data from the repo data, but also a museum data set, a public library data set, and projecting better climate change risks to GLAMs across the United States. So we have sort of these projections, but we don't have necessarily like a inventory of what we've lost or what we've come very close to losing. And I think that's really important, because that is, I think, how we start really building more advocacy, more awareness for incorporating resilience tools, making more funding for cultural heritage organizations to really prioritize resilience and adaptation.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you that you're thinking about that and doing that. And really, you know, I mean, like, so much, I was trained as a scientist, and so much of our raw material that we use for research comes from these archives. And so it's for so many reasons that we really need to be tracking this and finding ways of elevating the risk to these organizations. Stephanie and Rebecca, any research question that you wish somebody was working on?
I would love to see someone working on what the economic impact is of libraries that do invest in more resilient facilities. So, particularly for public libraries, where when you've got a more resilient facility that's off the grid or has the battery backup or is able to, serve as that cooling and heating center, I think there's an economic impact to a local community that, if understood better, would accelerate investment in public library infrastructure for resiliency purposes. I think it's, when you think about the really prevalence of a local public library in pretty much every town across the country, if not the world, you could see the strength of investing in that piece of infrastructure for that need. And I just always think back to, I guess it was Hurricane Irene in my system at least, where we did become the #1 spot for telecommuting in the Hudson Valley. We were the place that people were going to meet with FEMA to get the reimbursement to rebuild their homes. Like, there's a significant economic impact that is not understood by libraries providing that service.
Right, and not both as hubs of information, but and also places where community gather when there is an environmental impact, and of course, to actually help with education and dissemination of ideas and plans. I'm gonna ask Stephanie her question, and then we'll go to Tammy's question. I mean, Stephanie for her response, and then Tammy's question.
I was going to say something very similar, Rebecca. I think, like, what is that value of, like, museums and organizations as like second responders, right? It's like there's this whole mission-driven piece of like educating, et cetera. But then I do think there's this piece of like supporting your community. And then even beyond that, like, how do you, like, what your reach is and how you're, like, how do you have your visitors, like, even go home, right? How do you measure that? And then are they changing their behavior, focusing on sustainability? So I think there's that. And then there's this whole also like equity piece, of trying to make sure organizations, it's not like just large organizations that are like have big endowments that have the resources to do something, but like how do you make sure those smaller organizations are getting those support, funding, resources, et cetera, to support their communities, et cetera. So kind of like similar data set, I think maybe we just do the research together and then trying to like layer on to just make sure that as we continue building that it's impactful and equitable.
Yeah, I think all three of you talk about things that will have a positively reinforcing impact, right? Like if we have the data that shows the impact that these organizations are having, or what that loss is, hopefully it is going to start a positively reinforcing cycle of new funding and support. Tammy, question.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. It's given me a lot to think about. And I wondered if you would mind if I kind of presented a provocative question to think out loud together. It's something to do with the discussion about resiliency, the entangled nature of things, and public communication or public engagement. So as you were talking, I was thinking about two things. Something that Sarah Ahmed, the philosopher, said about walls being stronger than bodies. And I'm thinking about human beings that are made vulnerable by the effects of many things, including history. And at the same time, what Christina Sharp says in her book about the weather being the total climate, and that climate, in her words, being anti-Black. So I was wondering if you could think about together about other ways in which you imagine these institutions grappling with environmental racism, grappling with the social justice piece or the equity piece that was like the third part of what you're trying to achieve in the model that you presented. Does that include collaborating with artists? Does that include transforming the institution into another kind of entity at different moments in time? Like, I guess I'm wondering, like, what are you thinking about next steps in this particular problem space?
Tammy, going deep in the afternoon. I like it. Yeah, this is exactly why we picked the triple bottom line, to help educate more folks in our profession about this topic, because not only does it scale well for making decisions large and small, it also is a framework for internal decisions and external offerings. So as we think through, and I know I'm going to sound like I'm in the Matrix here as I start talking, so please bear with me. Or if you're an Always Sunny in Philadelphia fan, I'm like Charlie with a string diagram explaining how all of this is connected. But as you start to think about the injustices that are embedded in our structures that we're now trying to operate within in a crisis mode, you have the opportunity to either exacerbate what is already in existence or fix it along the way. And so that's what's so exciting to me, is to think about how sometimes when you're in that chaotic moment, you can break some things you couldn't have otherwise broken at normal pace in the course of 100 years. And so as we raise the awareness of what's possible in these moments, and that there are no rules about who to partner with and what stories we tell to convince people and who gets invited to the table, in a weird way, it's like a very exciting time perhaps to see some advancements that otherwise we would not have seen. It's obviously at great expense, of course. I would far prefer that we not have to deal with climate change and what's happening here, but that is our reality. So how do we use it for good in multiple sectors simultaneously with the kind of physical work that's going on? There's also a chance, I think, to do some cultural reparations and opportunities to really change how we view ourselves as communities. Excellent question.
I completely agree. I mean, I think there's also this, like, like museums, like all these organizations, it's not about like doing the same thing, business as usual in any way. All of what we're facing is like we need to be rethinking. And I think the biggest thing is like including. Museums aren't just these organizations where like you can't come in. And I think a lot are realizing like it's not like you're engaging with your community, you are your community. And so we're seeing a lot more a lot more focus on that, which like to me is like a lot, like we should have been there to begin with, but understand that that is not always the case. And also even just thinking about, it isn't just like you should be thinking about your community for, during a disaster, but it's that like friends from before and meeting people where they are. So I would say it isn't just assuming that like you have a community outreach department and they're just going to go out. It's not one-sided. Like all of this work is multi-dimensional. We don't want to be doing this work. Like, I don't want this job. I mean, I say that completely true, right? Like this, we should all be, able to be dealing with the climate crisis, and we should have our organizations, not even just like from an idealistic point of view, just like we should be doing this work no matter what. And people are at the center of it, right? Like communities are made of people, our staff have people in them. And so we need to be having these multi-way conversations. I want to highlight one organization that I think is doing really interesting work kind of at this intersection. The Natural History Museum, I'm going to put it in the chat, out of Vashon. Actually, I'm going to pronounce that incorrectly. Is it Vashon, Washington? Vashon, Washington, thank you. Their group worked with frontline community members in the Gulf South and Appalachia. And they created this National Environment and Justice Art Collaboration. And you talked, Temi, about artists. Like artists absolutely need to be everyone needs to be part of the conversation, but artists really do bridge that, I think, piece between people and like academia and just emotion, and bring some reality to, all of the technical data and strategy plans that are out there. And so this exhibit, which is really interesting, and I think it brings to light, the areas in the U.S. that have been taken, that were taken over, by oil companies, and just digging into someone's backyard, and really does bring to life and into view for, I think, people who are like, well, it's not in my backyard. So like, and the fire isn't near me. Reality to like changing that narrative and perspective. So all that to say, I think prioritizing that triple bottom line, but really not just like we do a lot of work where it's like it's with everyone else. We aren't telling anyone what to do. It's like what will serve you and how do we help you and how do we help each other? And we're seeing so much more of that, I think, especially as we have a younger generation coming in who is also prioritizing that, which is so great. So great question.
I'll just, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, but maybe I'll just sort of add on to something that I briefly talked about in my presentation. So I am really obsessed with like reorienting our work to the work of watersheds or bioregions. And part of my motivation for that is I once gave a talk in Canada, and I was kind of talking about borders in that. And someone came up to me and they said, you know, if next time you're back in the United States, take a look at a weather map and you'll notice that Americans seem to think that weather stops at the border with Canada because they never show it happening elsewhere. And I think, you know, what we know about climate change and environmental racism in particular is that it transcends political jurisdictions, right? Air pollution is not contained within the rich communities that are driving single passenger vehicles. It is going into working class communities and communities of color, whereas resulting in like higher childhood asthma rates, right? And so when I think kind of about how archives are often organized. They're often organized, not always, but a lot of archives kind of like fit into these political jurisdictions, right? Especially when we're talking about government archives, right? Or talking about institutional archives. It's like, you know, a local city government or a state government or a university, right? And so those are sort of politically boundaried, but our environmental problems are not politically boundaried. And part of the reason we are in this pickle in the first place is because we think we can contain our environmental issues to political jurisdictions. So that's sort of been a big, like, kind of, you know, the Sisyphean task I have laid out for myself is getting sort of archivists to think beyond the institutional or the political boundaries, because our environmental issues and how they impact the communities that we live and work with and serve, like, political jurisdictions don't make sense in that kind of way. So it's a little
Can I
bit of
just
a
add,
roundabout way of answering it.
can I just add on to like thinking about, right, it's local and global, right? It's like what we're doing is affecting everyone globally and vice versa. And so what, you know, like the fires hit, you know, celebrities who we heard on the, you know, on the TV that they lost everything, but it was like there's millions of other people who lost their things too. And then there's folks, you know, who we were talking to in Asheville who were like, why'd you forget about us? Like the news cycle isn't helping us either. So we have to like remember that at the very, you know, basis is like we're all people and we need to be helping each other too.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tammy, for that great question. Any other questions? So I was wondering, as my last question, if you could all share, since you know CALMA is based at UW, where we are training students. What I've written a question out, and I'm trying to find the exact language here. If you could share for emerging practitioners or students who are about to graduate, what they should be thinking of to be a part of you know, more resilient and sustainable organizations. How can they empower organizations that they're going to be going into?
I mean, I think it's part of what I said in my presentation that every job is a climate job, right? So no matter where you land after graduation or whatever your next path is as a researcher or continuing with your academic studies, it must be part of what you're thinking about and working on. So you get to pick your intersection with that in your choice of profession, but it must be part of your thinking. From choices that you're making as an individual to what we do in our professional lives, it is all of our responsibilities moving forward. So I would say that's part one of my answer. And part two is to prioritize managing your grief around the topic because it's overwhelming. And so as we think through all the things we we are faced with today, and a couple of us have made cracks about the past 100+ days. It's not funny. It's very, very serious, and will have a long-lasting impact on this country, and it's weighing us down. It's weighing me down. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but to find joy in your work, to find others who work through a frame of hope, will serve you well in the next several years, if not your whole career, in my experience. So I would say prioritize your own well-being, finding other people who, again, work through hope, but take responsibility as well for the reality that we are operating within.
Thank you so much.
I will co-sign everything Rebecca said, as always. But I also would just add on to what she said, which is, I sometimes joke that I have divested myself from hope, and what I have invested myself in is concepts of reciprocity. So I have really, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that so many people have shown up for me throughout my career and my work, and it is upon me to keep showing up for them in turn. So I'm really animated by principles of reciprocity. The other thing too that I would just add is I really wish people would write more publicly about the things that they are trying, whether it's in their own personal life or their working life, because I mean, even in this conversation, I always get asked, like, who's doing what? Who's trying this? And if people aren't talking about it publicly, I have no idea. So I think even if people are trying something and they don't feel like it's going perfectly, please just talk about it publicly, because it is so helpful for those of us on this panel, but also your colleagues, to just understand what people are trying, because that's how we make any kind of progress, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, I have two things. One, well, in addition to echoing what you both have said, I do think one is we need more organizations and communities to be talking about what they're doing. You can read a website, but what's actually happening behind it is usually mind-blowing. Like, there's organizations like I've talked to, and they're like, well, we worked with this mill worker, and like we're reusing this wood, and it's like, well, explain that on your website. Like, I want to see that. Like, architectural reconstruction is great, but I mean, that's really interesting. And I think also just don't be afraid to push back and, also kind of carve out your own path. Like, I went into school thinking I was going to be a doctor, and then became an art history major, and then went to museum studies, and that's where I realized I wanted to focus on climate. But it was 2008, and there were no jobs. There were no jobs, period, based on, what was happening. And like, make what you want out of your career. And, we're looking for all these fresh ideas, connections, and support in all of this work we're doing at this intersection. And so don't be afraid to be the person to say, we're going to create a green team, or we should be measuring our energy, or we should be doing XYZ. That's how we're going to get things done.
Fantastic advice. Thank you all so much. It has been illuminating, and I hope you were inspired by each other as much as clearly you were. But thank you again very much from all of us, researchers, practitioners, students, and good luck in all that you do.